The other night I shared another image that has been working with me for the last couple of weeks, and it's like somebody had asked the question, and we're talking a lot about soul, right? Adamus talks a lot about the soul in this book, The Act of Consciousness. And so the question was, okay, what is the soul? So, I want to know what you think. What is the soul?
So the soul is the thing that when our bodies die is freed from the body and then goes back to everything, oneness.
Okay. So it's freed from the body. It resides in the body and is freed from the body when we transition, when the body passes on. Okay? That's all right. One idea. Anybody else? Soul.
The soul is the I am.
The soul is the I am?
Yes.
I like that. I like that. The I am. All right. So what's been coming is, and I like this, but let's just say that again, that we can use something that just kind of helps us kind of map it out a little bit, right? So in the beginning, we knew that there was, and the name we've given it is God, right? And even anything we could add on to that is a limitation. So in pure non-duality, as an example, God is. That's it. There's nothing else.
How do we know that, though?
Well, we don't. What do we know? We don't know anything. The ego mind knows nothing, right? But what's channeling through, what's coming through from Spirit, what you're sharing, are things that are helping to break down this I think I know self, okay? So that we'll open up and can be informed and begin to know rather than guess and think, okay? God did not create you to be a thinker. That's bad news. Bad news, right? So let's think about that. Right? So in the beginning there was God, and then God created. God had a thought. A thought is creative, right? That's part of what we're understanding now. Thoughts are creative. God had a thought, and God thought of you. You are a thought in the mind of God, and you are a thought of love. Okay? And another name that's been well accepted, right, is that God's child is Christ. And that's not the baby Jesus, but baby Jesus was one of the individuations of the consciousness of Christ, the consciousness, okay? So let's say that in the beginning this is kind of where we were. And then you and I, like children do, and it's been said, or it's been channeled, I'm trying to keep myself out of trouble, that there's actually a finite number of angels like you that are the children of God. God created you, and then everything else you created. Because you are also, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, right? You are also then, if God created you, what must you be? A creator. And so then you create, then you began creating. Exercising your omniscient, omnipresent, and omnipotent power of creation. Of what are you creating? Love. And so then a couple of us said, whoa, I think it was Adam and Eve, what would it be like, right, to play a game of separation where instead of only echoing back the thoughts of God, in other words, seeing love where it exists as it's being expressed through the mind of God, and echoing back. That's really what that's really what being a creator is. For the child of God is to recognize creation. And we recognize it. The song of gratitude is, oh, I see love, I recognize that love, and in that recognition, that is a feedback loop, if you will, to the mind of God. Remember now, this is a little complicated for the cat that's trying to drive the car, right? It's a little complicated for the cat. But don't let the cat drive you over the cliff, right? all is well, but we're trying to construct just a metaphor so that we kind of get our head around it a little bit, so that we can kind of see, if you will, maybe just a little bit where we are. And so then that was called the fall, right? So when my child falls asleep in the back seat of the car, you know, they just fell asleep. We call it falling, but we've been told, Michael, you know, cast Lucifer into the darkness, right? And we talked about that a little bit. And who's Lucifer? Okay, what's the definition of Lucifer? The light bearer, right? And so Archangel Michael wasn't casting the light bearer into darkness. The light bearer, Lucifer, we chose and said, we're going to go into the darkness, and we knew we were going to lose our name, so we have no identity. In the darkness, we suddenly have no identity, and we are in the darkness, and we're alone. Now, that in and of just that story is pretty scary, right? We would say that we were afraid. But when we did that, in the Bible, and I'm just going to put one more little level here, we could say, so Christ then kind of became split, okay? And there was a part of the mind, we could call it the Holy Spirit, we could call it the higher self, nothing more than your right mind, that didn't fall asleep. So only a portion of this Christ consciousness kind of fell asleep, if you will, and began to dream, a dream of separation. So when I think of it, I look at it like a little sliver of mind. And it appears that this little sliver of mind is separated somehow. And then when we go to sleep at night, it's kind of like we do it again, and there's another little sliver. And it looks like they're separated out. Does that make sense visually for you? Right? Because it's like we're taking a slice and then we're separating it out, and another slice is separate. But this is just a fragment of mind. And you know your dreaming mind at night is pretty crazy. It doesn't know who you are. It doesn't know where you are. It doesn't know what your plans are. It doesn't know what your life's about, et cetera, et cetera. And we talked about that quite a bit. But when you wake up, when you kind of become more whole, when you make yourself more whole again, when that mind collapses back into you, it just kind of disappears. But you still feel you're separate. So we're going to call that self the separated self. Whoops. The separated self, right? And just imagine then if this self were to fall into an experience, or just begin to imagine and pretend and dream an experience, and you know that your dreams are very, very real. Very real. You believe it completely until that you're committed to it, and that little sliver of mind is committed to this dreaming self until you wake up in the morning, or in the afternoon if you're lucky. So this mind then became the separated self, and we can call that the ego self. Okay? So here's the deal. The separated self is really what I want to call the self of choice. I got that right? Choice. Because this self, seeing itself as separated, it literally created in the illusion of separation, in the darkness, not knowing its identity, not knowing any light whatsoever, and filled with fear. And of course, something has happened. I'm no longer hearing the thoughts of love, no longer experiencing the vibration or the knowing of love. And to kind of fill the void, this little ego self then began to create a thinking. This is the thinking self.
Why did we do this, Tony?
Because we can't stand the silence. Try to go home tonight and put earplugs in and just say, I'm going to go into silence, and see if you can have your mind completely shut down. Good luck with that.
No, right, I got
Right? You can't handle it. You can't do it. And so we created the ego out of fear and guilt. And this guilt factor comes in, oh shit, maybe I've done something wrong. I'm separated from the light. I don't know my name. I've lost my identity. I'm in this void, if you will. And you can see how we can start crafting metaphors and stories to kind of help try to explain this experience, right? But it's still really hard to get our head around it, right? Because it just sounds so ethereal and it just sounds so weird, right?
Why did Adam and Eve do it though in the beginning?
Well, Adam and Eve is just a metaphor.
Right.
And in a couple of months, we're going to pick up another book. We're going to take a journey in that book, and it's going to give you the same metaphor, but with just different actors.
Yeah.
But it kind of helps us get our head around this without being so committed to these. We can't just go to one and only. We've been told go to only. There's only one book, right? So what the hell are we doing reading anything else? Because we've transcended that idea. Those books were written by people just like us, and they weren't enlightened. And now enlightened information is coming through, helping us to see. So some of these other enlightened teachings that are coming through are kind of helping us to see this in a way that is more graspable or maybe easier for us to get our head around. That's all.
Yeah.
Right? Because the cat's a little scared, of driving this car by itself. Okay, not knowing where it's going. So then the ego then created a symbol of separation. And that symbol, for me and you, is the body. So, I like to relate to this separated self as soul. It's almost like in this separated idea of being, not knowing its name, not really remembering its identity, of being kind of freaked out, it doesn't really know its true self. Kind of like the sleeping self at night. It's kind of separated out one more level, and so it doesn't even know where it's at, safe at home in bed, doesn't know who it is really, what its life construct is, etc., etc. Okay? I know this is, I hope I'm not losing you here, but this,
No, you're fine.
okay?
I mean, but we got questions, but what?
Okay, so the soul, we could say, is the self that is working at rejoining with the whole self, putting these pieces back together, right? So the story of the trilogy, you see it? There was just the one, and then the idea of love is you, Christ consciousness. But when you separated yourself out, you and I chose this. This didn't happen to you. It's not an experiment, at all. It's what we chose because we had the power, omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent, to pretend. We couldn't really separate ourselves out, but we could certainly create an experience that was possible. And when we did that, in this experience, all these things began to be our experience, and we started filling the void. Being a creator, we started filling the void with ideas, thinking self, right? And that thinking self began to construct the idea that maybe we'd done something wrong, guilt. Maybe we'd been punished. The story of Adam and Eve is it's a story of punishment, being cast out of the garden of what is it, the Garden of Eden, right?
Right. It was Eve's fault.
It's always the woman's fault, so of course. So that's a metaphor.
Right.
That's really not what's going on. This was written in a way to keep us literally. And who knows? I don't even need to go there. It was there, but now we're starting to see that that's not really the way things are. It's just a metaphor. Okay. So the separated self, the soul. There is the idea that in my vehicle I can go forward, and I can reconnect with my higher self, or I can go backwards, if you will, or drop down into this. And so we could really call this hell because we all know you can't imagine anything about how horrible hell could be that you can't find here if you really want to look at it. In fact, our worst ideas about some construct of hell is an image of something that we've experienced or heard about in this existence, right? This, if you want to call it the in-between world in that construct or metaphor. So the point I want to make is that the soul, the separated self, is always making a choice between listening or giving its attention to the higher self. That's the worst star I've ever drawn. This is the goal, tuning into this channel. The AM channel. And down here is the M channel. Something's messed up here. Because this is the illusory self, because it's the sleeping self, the separated, it believes itself to be separated out. And it certainly does feel like hell. You know, if we experience separation, we experience death, our own or someone else's, the separating out of and the loss of love, you know, a loss of communication. It's all those things are experienced here, and it certainly feels like this. But here's the thing I want to make. There is no neutral. Our little car, our little mind, has no neutral position. We're either focused on this and giving all of our attention to this, which is really giving all of our attention to the thinking mind, the thinking self. We're giving that 100% of our focus. Or in those moments of peak experiences, in those moments of joy and bliss, in those moments of just clarity and purity of thought, no thought, in those moments, we've switched gears, and I like to say switch channels, like it's tuning in, and now we're listening to the higher self. We're listening to the I am channel. We're listening to the I exist channel. We become the channel. For this voice of God, the Holy Spirit, if you will, is the voice of God, nothing more than your right mind. That's what you're channeling. And all of those that are not asleep, if you will, the multitude of our brothers and sisters and our guides and our supporters and our family that are part of this consciousness are also able, when we open up, to be channeled and to be listened to. Ultimately, connecting with your higher self is the goal, but we've got to kind of, it's like swimming at the bottom of the ocean. We got to get up there before we can actually begin to hear the voice of God, if you will, our higher self, our true self. It's kind of like being able to see the light of the sun in the ocean. If I'm on the bottom of the ocean a few thousand feet down, or how many ever miles or whatever, it's just pitch black. I've got to get up. I've got to swim up. I've got to get up there, which is to move up in consciousness through our levels of consciousness I drew earlier. That's the game, right? So where's the soul? The soul is really the separated child of God that believes itself to be separated, that's kind of sees itself as separated from the whole. But that's the illusion. Just like the sleeping self at night thinks it's separated, it doesn't even know where you are, that you're safe at home in bed. It separated itself from that capital K knowing. Of even the small mind has some knowing. You woke up this morning, you knew what you were going to do with your day. You knew where you were sleeping. You knew hopefully where you were at, what was going on, right? So when we fell, if you will, into darkness with no name, we just begin to make shit up, right? And that's the game. And the game is to return through the levels of consciousness to this place, and recognizing we have choice is the key.